everyone, welcome to the webinar. We'll begin in just a few minutes while we're letting everyone in. Thank you.
Okay, so let's just get started here. Welcome everyone to the panel. I have here with us John Sculley. He is the co-founder and the vice chairman of Zeta. He was the CEO of Apple for more than 10 years and was also the CEO of Pepsi, where he helped create the 2-liter bottle and the Pepsi Challenge. We also have David Steinberg with us. He is the co-founder and the chairman and the CEO of Zeta, which he helped co-found in 2007. He also founded Infonic, Sterling Cellular, and Sterling Communications. Thank you both so much for being here with us today.
Tiffany, we can't be more excited than to have you hosting us. Thank you very much.
Yes, of course. So we are going to cover quite a lot of territory today. We're going to be talking about the pandemic, kind of how CMOs have handled that very tough situation. We'll talk a bit about data, about privacy, about the digitization of the industry. We're going to talk about, what businesses should be thinking about as we kind of go further into 2021. So let's just jump right in. 2020, as we all know, was rough, and 2021 will not be easy. So, John, let's start with you. Tell us about the struggles of CMOs in the past year. How has their role changed? What were the most crucial lessons that they and their brands had to learn, and did they successfully learn those lessons?
Well, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, nobody honestly knew how the year was going to turn out. And yet, most of us realized that the year turned out to be a pretty spectacular year. I mean, even the industries that were obviously hit hard, like hospitality, airline travel, things of this sort, have been coming back rapidly. And I think what we've learned during 2020 is how adaptive CMOs have been to be able to first understand what's going on, and then being able to adjust in real time, just in flight, to be able to take advantage of it. One of the big changes that I see, because I've been around the marketing world for many decades, is that what makes this decade different, and I think it's one of the reasons why CMOs were able to adapt so quickly, is that we've never had massive data at the level that we have today, and it's all basically real-time feedback. And so the big shift, I think, in marketing, regardless of which industry you're in, is that it used to be you delivered a message and you would count the number of times with frequency and reach that you were able to say that message. Now it's all about taking massive amounts of data, personalizing it, and being able to build a relationship, and you're able to adapt that relationship as things change. And we clearly saw a year, every week, things changed, and you had to be able to adapt. And that's what the best CMOs were able to do in 2020, adapt quickly, using this massive data effectively.
Right. So David, the consensus seems to be, like John mentioned, that CMOs had to act really fast, that there was a lot coming at them in the past few months, and they had to think on their feet. And now everyone is saying that CMOs need to think really strategically about how to attract and retain customers in 2021. Tell us a little bit about what kind of challenges they're up against and how should they specifically do it?
I think first of all, John said it really well, and I think your question is really intuitive, right? So everybody's drinking out of the fire hose. Last March, none of us knew what was coming. So I think all of us went into crisis mode, and we lived in that crisis mode for the entire second quarter. As we emerged from Q2, we really emerged into an ecosystem of sort of very empathetic marketing. If you were pushing too hard on now, you really had negative feedback. So the CMOs had to walk a very tight line as it related to that. What I've really seen, and I know John and I have talked about it, is sort of this, people talk about the 5-year acceleration of the move to digital. And we're talking about it a lot. But the rationale really is, A, how do you speak to people who want to hear your message first and foremost? How do you not speak to people who have no interest in your message, right? So immediately you can lower your expense dramatically by segmenting just those two very basic baskets. Like John said, it used to be, you got to hear the brand 12 times. We have to get that frequency to get somebody to make a purchasing decision. Now it's, we don't even want to talk to people who have no interest in our product.
Right.
As CMOs come out, what does that really mean? Why move to digital? Well, A, the ability to target, and B, attribution capabilities, the ability to understand the true return on investment in marketing. So if you think about business and evolution, right, over the last 100 years, as we've moved from very small businesses to what are today conglomerates, large businesses, mid-sized businesses, small businesses, and sort of proprietorships, right? As we've done that societally, a lot of the change has been, how do they consolidate and look at return on investment across technology spend, across research and development spend, across all these different components of their business? The place that has really always been a bit of a black box for most organizations has been marketing. That's now changing, right? So as Winston Churchill liked to say, and Machiavelli before him, never waste a good crisis. And the crisis over the last year has really led to this sort of what everybody's talking about, which is this 5-year acceleration of digital. But the reason beneath that is the ability to truly segment and target people who are really in your segment for purchasing, and 2, track it and really understand the attribution of your marketing.
Yeah, I want to drill into this idea that you mentioned just a few minutes ago about not only the targeting of consumers and the segmentation of consumers, but also this idea of the segmentation of brand companies, right? Because as we all know, there is no universal brand. There is no one brand that addresses all consumer needs. There are many different brands in many different buckets, right? So as we're talking about this 5-year acceleration, tell me about some of the pitfalls of this rapid uptick as it relates to different companies of different sizes and different focuses, and how can marketers proceed successfully given that there's so much fragmentation across the brand ecosphere?
John?
Sure. Well, if we go back before the era of digital marketing, there used to be a popular saying in the marketing world, I know that 50% of the money I spend is wasted. I just don't know which 50%. And that all changed with digital marketing, because in digital marketing, as David pointed out at the beginning, we actually do know not only who is most likely to be interested in what you want to talk to them about, but you also know who is not most likely to be interested. And so the efficiency of digital marketing is that we can, segment the most likely people that will want to have a relationship with. The other thing is that we can actually now start to think about things that we could never do in marketing before. In marketing in the pre-digital era was basically, here's my brand, you hold it up, it's an Apple, it's a Pepsi, it's something else. It could be a service. And the brand was what people could recognize. It was the identity of the product or the service. Well, now, brand is really the experience. And the experience can be the consideration before you decide you want to buy something, the consideration while you're making that decision, the consideration even after you purchase something, say, well, now that I got it home, it may not be exactly what I want. So now part of that experience is, how well are you treated if you want to return the product? How quickly did I get the product in the first place? So what we learned during the pandemic was that marketers had to not only think about their messaging, but they had to think about their delivery of the experience in every way. And so when you think of something like Amazon Prime, is the brand Amazon Prime, or is the brand the experience that Amazon offers you a way to buy many, many different products from many different vendors, and yet the experience that rewards Amazon with Amazon Prime is that people know that the experience of that whole consideration, choice, and the final decision of what you're going to purchase is going to be done in a consistent way. Well, that's just one example, because the digital marketing lets us do many, many things just beyond that. But certainly reimagining what the shopping experience is one really good example that really got reinvented. Think about that. A year ago, if we were sitting here talking about, well, what do you think the shopping experience is going to be over the next 5 years? Well, what we discovered was the new shopping experience wasn't going to take 5 years. It was going to take a matter of weeks or months at most. And the whole world had to adapt. And those who adapted quickly did really well. And those who didn't adapt so well, so quickly didn't do so well. So the speed at which things happen in the digital era is one of the things that I think makes it so obviously different than what we had before. But this growth in incremental time, things that happen at an accelerated rate of change, is what all of us as marketers experienced in 2020.
So there's a need to develop a much more holistic worldview of what constitutes marketing in a much, much more compressed time frame. David, what do you think about that?
Well, of course, John's totally right. I mean, this sort of the acceleration of the move to digital was also the acceleration of the move to virtual, right? And the move to virtual created an experimental issue that most organizations were not prepared for, which, I'd say probably the most prepared organization in the world was Amazon. And then sort of everybody worked from there, which is now creating new challenges for CMOs who have to figure out how to navigate the Amazon marketing ecosystem and the ability to integrate into their experience capabilities so they can deliver through that channel. The other really sort of interesting thing to me that we've looked at over the last 10 years, but really accelerated, is the fractionalization of brands. So we spent, I don't know, 100, 200 years moving to Apple, Pepsi, Google, Microsoft, the most valuable brands in the world. And now who has the advantage? The direct-to-consumer platforms, right? So the DTCs who have said, we're going to build a very narrow, very tight experience that is going to be exceptional. I'm going to deliver fast. I'm going to take back with no questions. I'm going to build a low-cost product where I don't have to spend a fortune on building brand, but I'm going to move right to the digital ecosystem. So not only do I get rid of the 50% of marketing I don't understand, I'm going to get rid of the 90% of marketing that's not going to be incredibly productive. And they're building these very fast growth businesses. So what's happening? Now the conglomerates are buying them and they're starting to see brand fractionalize as they can run a portfolio of brands, which to John's point are as much about the brand experience in a virtual ecosystem as they are in the product you're manufacturing itself.
Let's
I could pick up on what David said, because I love the way he explained that. That it used to be in marketing pre-digital that the goal was to get people to react. Remember how people would talk about the attention economy? Get people's attention, get them to react. Well, now that we've learned with digital marketing, we can do much more than that. We can get people to not only react, we can get them to reflect. And what does reflect means? It means consideration. It means making choices. It means making decisions and putting them into a context of how does it fit in to who I am, how I like to live, how I think about things, how I would use this product or service in my life. And particularly during the pandemic, we learned that life was a little bit different. So you had to set different priorities. You had to figure out how you're going to spend your time, where you'd spend your time, in ways you never had anticipated before the pandemic started. So the beauty of marketing automation is that in the case of Zeta Digital with our global cloud, what we're able to do is to track, I think, David, it's like 3,700 signals for each individual, which means that
it's 700, John, it's 3,700 attributes. It's trillions of signals.
Okay, even better. So it's not just knowing a small number of things. Back when I was a marketer, it was like, so what's the demographics? What's the psychographics? So you're dealing with a relatively small number of attributes. But now we're dealing with huge numbers of attributes. So the ability to personalize, not just personalize what you know about that person, but personalize how you convey the message. So it used to be when I was involved with creating campaigns, we'd say, well, what's the best campaign we can have? How does it tell our message? We go out and test it all different ways. But now there may be 100 different versions of that campaign. There could be 500 different versions of that campaign going out. And because we can personalize it, we can tweak it to the individual, and not only just based on things we know about them, but we can watch how they react and respond and what they're thinking and things. So the whole experience is so much more expansive than anything we thought about experience pre-digital marketing.
Right. Let's drill down into what you were talking about, this idea of reaction and reflection. Because it doesn't matter whether you're a monolith brand or whether you're one of these flexible, smaller startup brands. So let's talk a bit about tone, right? It's been a year of crisis and reevaluation, and the brands found themselves suddenly thrust into situations where they had to show empathy and diversity and ethical fortitude. And it doesn't matter whether you have 500 different personalized campaigns or just one, right? A lot of brands didn't really know how to react to this kind of need. They didn't do it particularly well, and a lot of them didn't do it particularly creatively. So, John, what stood out to you as brands tried to tackle the pandemic and issues of racial justice, the economy, political toxicity, and climate change in recent months. When did you say, oh, that's a really good way to go about it? And when were you just horrified at what you saw?
Well, I think the things I learned, because we're all going through a learning process. The things I learned in 2020 was that people think differently about the same set of facts, and that's conditioned by what their experiences were prior and what they're thinking about and what their individual situations are. So brands had to learn how to quickly become insightful as to what the person thought. So my sense is that we all learned that it takes an ability of an organization to be able to quickly absorb lots of data. But obviously, you're not talking about looking at lots of numbers and things. You're talking about how to use that data in a very creative way. So the creativity in marketing used to be, what's the copy line? What's the slogan, let's say, for the brand? What's the brand logo look like? Those things are only part of the story. Now we know that you have to look at it in terms of what are the attributes of that individual? What do we think's going on in the news? How is that going to be needed to be adjusted this week to what you might have said 2 weeks ago?
Right. I mean, it's a very divisive time, and we're a very divided country, right? So as you both are talking about personalized campaigns and really targeting individuals, I mean, how do you juggle that as a marketer when your client base is split in so many different directions?
Well, first of all, I mean, and I don't want to talk too much about us specifically, but for each client, we create a private data cloud, and that private data cloud learns specific to that client. So each client's messaging is going to be different. And to John's point, we used to exist in a world of A/B testing. We now exist in a world where thousands of tests can be run simultaneously to gauge results before you go wide with a particular campaign. But when you think about it, it's sort of, I always joke, 2020 was sort of like 1918 plus 1929 plus 1968 equals 2020, right? That's a lot to process for a CMO in a particular year where you're dealing with a pandemic, massive sort of moves to racial inequality and sort of the entire experience around that. And what could have been what we thought might have replicated the Great Depression, right? So we sort of skirted that one so far. We'll see how long that goes. But as you think about it, the messaging by brand has got to be different, and it's got to change. So, if you look at, Clorox, they're going to have a massively different messaging than an automotive company, right? Like I remember sort of, I forget if it was last April or May, I was watching TV, like we all are, right? Like how do I get more content, to consume? And a TV commercial, the first car commercial I had seen in a long time came on, and it was somebody driving the car. And the voiceover was, you don't need to go to the dealership. We're going to bring the car to you to test drive. We're going to clean it. And if you lose your job in the first 6 months, we're going to make your first year's payments for you. That was an incredibly powerful message. It was fast, it was innovative, it understood the environment where people were really scared of losing their jobs. And yet they were able to put a car commercial out that I felt was very empathetic and really made sense. There were a lot of ads that missed the mark, where they had already done the production and they just weren't gonna sort of recut, right? So at Zeta, we do as much video today, digitally or CTV, as we do, sort of just pure digital marketing. The messaging and the empathy has got to come through from the brand. Now, to your earlier point, Tiffany, we're exiting that a bit. We're still there, but I think we're exiting it. And CMOs are going to have to pivot again from what was originally very strategic to very empathetic and very careful, to how do you now take advantage again of the emergence, sort of what we call at Zeta, the emerge stronger plan, so that you can emerge stronger than you came in. And, you know, if you were an industry that was particularly hard hit and you survived, you're going to have a natural advantage because a lot of your competitors are going to not have survived. How do you take advantage of that without looking like you're being contrite? And I think it's going to be an interesting line. Sorry, Tiffany.
Right. But I mean, there's also this difference that I think we need to consider between being a brand that's sensitive to the environment and being empathetic, and a brand that is trying to develop and support a brand purpose, right? This idea of brand purpose was all over the place in the past few months. So given that you had CMOs that were juggling balance sheet pressures, sizable sales declines, with this push to create brand pressure, I mean, how do you juggle those two? How do you try to stand behind something while selling your product or service?
Well, a lot of it goes back to not just messaging, but sort of living it, right? So if you are a completely non-diverse company and you're not working on your internal diversity, how do you champion that as your brand? It's just sort of like, it's very hard. So I think that a lot of this is for truly great companies who are either trying to build a brand or build a service or build an experience. It's sort of, you've got to embrace a lot of what you're putting into your messaging internally. And I think you're going to see a lot of companies who haven't get negative blowback from that, where they're not putting their money where their mouth is, yet they're out there pushing that as their brand, but they're not trying to further diversity internally. I'm not suggesting everybody can get there overnight, but a lot of this is sort of like the understanding and movement and action to it, where I think you've got other brands who are just saying, this sounds good, let's go forth and do that. John, I don't know, what do you think of that?
Well, what I've been thinking about as you've been talking, David, is I remember when Apple had its back up against the wall, IBM was just coming out with the IBM PC Junior, and Business Week had declared IBM the winner, and we hadn't even introduced the Macintosh yet. And when we made the first introductory commercial for the Mac, which was called 1984, and we showed it on the Super Bowl in January of 1984, it got an incredible amount of attention, but that commercial cost $900,000 to produce. And we had to scramble to get it produced in 6 weeks. Well, what's also gone on over this last year is just an incredible change in video technology. Now, we're all familiar with Zoom that came out of nowhere and now has become, kind of like, Kleenex, a word we just, use as just though it was always there. But video now has become incredibly high resolution, extremely inexpensive to make video, and people love video. And so if I were a marketer, I would say, well, how do I put those ideas together? The fact that I can get very personalized data, and I can now make video communications, and I can make many different versions of it because it's really inexpensive, and I can do it really fast. So if something happens in the news and I want to be able to adapt to that, particularly for different groups, and I can start to do things that were literally not possible even 12 months ago. And then you say, well, where is this all going? Well, I can tell you, because I'm involved in high-tech technology as well. Video is just going to keep roaring on with its capabilities and the role in which marketers will be able to put together, adaptable campaigns in a matter of a few hours, and they can do it in many different versions, and they can do it anywhere they want. And you can combine that with marketing automation, and all of a sudden the game's changed. It's a totally different game. And so the big success stories, you'll hear, headlines on company X or company Y that has come up with a really innovative way to take advantage of a particular situation that was very empathetic to issues that may have been on people's minds. But you know, people's habit and attention is so short now that if you had to go out and spend 2 weeks building that campaign, it would be too late. Now you can actually go build those campaigns in a matter of hours.
Right, right. I'm glad you brought up video because it actually serves as a nice segue into this other theme that I wanted to talk about, which is just broadly data, right? And I get the sense that these concerns about tone were mixed up with these concerns about data in a way that showed up a lot in video this past year. And by that, I mean brand safety, right? There were a lot of companies that wanted to get into the video space. They were utilizing the video space, but they were also really concerned about how their videos were showing up, where they were showing up, how they could use data to make sure that those videos were showing up in a way that weren't offensive, that didn't actually push consumers away. So let's talk kind of broadly about this buzzword of the year, data, right? I had a marketing executive once explain to me that the industry has oceans of data, but just a trickle of insight. And Dave, what I'm hoping you can do is tell me whether or not this is still the case, right? Have CMOs been able to use the past year to figure out brand safety issues through data? Have they been able to shore up their first party data infrastructure? Have they managed to link their data reserves across brick and mortar and e-commerce? Give me the lay of the land.
Well, that's a lot. That's a lot of questions in one. But what I would start by saying is, brand safety, whether it's video or your ads, has become sort of mission critical. It's table stakes to sort of digital marketing. And brands have made the decision, and effectively there's software that has fixed this problem that allows you to know that you're not running alongside of stuff you really don't want to run alongside of. If you look at sort of oceans of data equals minimal insights, I think a lot of it depends on sort of the software company and the data companies you're partnering with. There are companies that can take this data, use artificial intelligence, and sort of synthesize it down to a level of intent. Now, that's sort of our infomercial, so I put it out there. But there are other companies that can do it too, and there are companies that do it well. But CMOs that are not focused on that are going to continue to try to boil the ocean. And if they don't really focus on the sort of understanding, and I think you really summed it up in your question, in that intent is the key to marketing, period. Why does Google work? Because there are very few platforms that get you closer to a transaction, right? The consumer goes in and searches for what they want. Why does Amazon work? Because people are already buying when they're there. So it's sort of like I joke, would you like fries with that, as they build their platform to sort of add to it. If you look at us at Zeta, we're doing a very similar thing. We're taking all this data, we're using artificial intelligence, and we're sort of synthesizing it down to intent, whether somebody's going to churn off a platform or they want to buy another product. As CMOs look at the ecosystem, the closer they can get to that intent, the more successful they're going to be. Now, as it relates to the integration of online data, CRM data, marketing data, point of sale data, in-store data, most very large enterprises are nowhere remotely near an integration of all of that data. Now, what they're able to do is they're able to build sort of very high quality attribution modeling online, and then they can sort of geo-fence their retail locations to sort of begin to understand, how does their sales funnel really work? Does it start on Facebook, or does it start on Google, or does it start in email? Does it then cycle through their website, or does it cycle through their call center? Does it end up at a retail store within a 5-mile circumference of their home, or a 5-mile circumference of their office, or where they vacation, right? All of those different things are just starting to sort of be collected. And as the information feeds back to the marketing ecosystem, decisioning just gets smarter, right? So I think John summed it up so well, right? So the big problem in marketing is they knew they were wasting 50% of their marketing, they just didn't know which half. The truth of the matter is the average marketer is wasting 97% of their marketing, right? If they can get to a 3% conversion rate of sort of marketing to sales, that's incredible, right? So you're effectively, how do we narrow it from what was 100% down to 50 where it is today for most marketing? The real holy grail is how do you speak to the 3% of people who are going to transact at 100%? And we're a ways from there from an intent-based modeling perspective, but we really are on our way.
Is that why so many more marketers are trying to work on first-party data and trying to create those reserves? And tell me a little bit about where that is in the broad scheme of things.
John, do you want to jump in on that, or you want me to take it?
Why don't you take that, because I've got another thing I want to bring up with Tiffany when you finish that.
Great. So, listen, all moves are to first-party data. I mean, literally, it's the data that you know you can control from a permissioning perspective, a regulatory perspective, and a true knowledge base. How you append that and expand it is how you expand your market and how you grow, right? So every marketer that is not focusing on truly understanding and then expanding their own first-party data is not on point, in my opinion. And I think you're totally right. Then the question is, how do you append it and how do you expand it so that you can take what looks like this, and this, and make it look like that? And that's how you can really build your addressable market on an intelligent basis. And to me, that is really the future, not just of marketing, but of digital marketing, CTV, addressable TV, and everything that can lead back to attribution. Because the moment they transact, they're growing your first-party data. And you can then learn from that, and it becomes an incredible, really, cycle to make it work. John,
yeah, we'll definitely talk about addressable platforms in a bit, but yeah, John.
Actually, my question I'd like to ask David, because I have been able to, I've been around a long time, and so I've been able to see some of the really big changes. And one of the big changes is when cable television, came in, and another big change was when large, screen, flat panels could come in, and you could change the whole world of how we thought about sports. Well, I'd love to hear your point of view, David, about the role of connected TV and the role of streaming and how you see that fitting in with marketing automation.
Well, it's sort of, I used to say that, 70% of global marketing was analog, 30% was digital, right? So you had TV, radio, print, outdoor advertising, and direct mail. And then I would say those numbers are going to juxtapose over 5 to 10 years. We just didn't know when, right? So it'd go to 70% digital and 30% analog. And I always felt the biggest move was going to be from the biggest category, which was TV, right? So I would think TV would move from analog to digital. What we're really seeing, John, is TV is going to become digital. As the platforms have fractionalized and you've moved from, I still remember being a kid and having 4 stations, right? Then, by the time I was like 10, we had like 30 stations. That was like great. Now there's hundreds of stations, right? But it's no longer about stations, it's about platforms. You've got all the different CTV and addressable TV platforms where you can ingest content, right? Now, Netflix has made the decision, at least thus far, to be ad-free. And then you have platforms like Hulu and Roku and parts of Fire, Amazon, that allow for advertising inside of there. In those ecosystems today, we can get as targeted with a video ad as we can on a online programmatic ad or even an email. So the ability to target an individual from a true people-based marketing perspective is expanding from what really started as email, moved into customized email plus programmatic, then really moved to online video, and now is really expanding into those platforms. I believe that in the coming years, you're going to see the set-top box become more like a Roku box, and you'll start to see advertising on an individualistic basis put right into there. As that happens, it really goes back to Tiffany's question of how do they take first-party data, truly understand who wants to buy their product from a level of intent of greater than a 50%, 60%, 70%. Layer on top of that, who will be credit approved, and then you only run the ad to that person. So literally, if you're not running multiple pivots on the data, does it really matter if I'm running a credit card offer to somebody who would love the card but won't be approved?
Yeah.
Now today, that's part of that 50%, right? But how do you get it down from 50 to 40 to 30 to 20? I don't really think we'll ever get to 3. Maybe Minority Report, you're sort of getting there, but we're a long ways off from there. But I believe that CTV, addressable TV, and OTT, which are by far the fastest growing components of sort of digital, are the future of how analog shifts to digital, the ability to go from sort of boiling the ocean to incredibly targeted, centers around platforms' abilities to do that well, and then attribute it back. Because once again, Tiffany, your first question, how do chief marketing officers move from empathetic back to strategic? It's all about return on investment. If I can spend $1 and generate $1.20 and my gross margins are high enough, that's amazing. This is the ability to do that.
Yeah, I wrote a story actually a while ago about efforts to have on streaming platforms, for example, be able to serve you, David, an ad for Coke at the same time during the same program as it's serving John an ad for Pepsi, right? So I've been thinking a lot about this since we're going into upfront season. There's been a lot of chatter about the platforms with the award shows and all that. So either of you, if you could give me a sense of, given how much talk there's been about cord cutting in the past few months during the pandemic, is that still going to hold once people get vaccinated and stay-at-home orders are lifted? I mean, is the growth really going to be still in the streaming platforms and CTV in the second half of this year?
Well, let's be frank, and then I'll throw it, John, let me just give a quick, and then I'll throw it to you. This was accelerating at an incredible pace before the pandemic started. So this is not new. The fractionalization of content and the ability to get Disney Plus or Netflix or Paramount Plus or Peacock or CBS, it's not going to be thousands. It's going to consolidate at some point, but it's going to be multiple platforms that allow that. And to answer the question, today we can run an ad to David for a Cabernet Sauvignon and John for Diet Pepsi on the same programming next door. We can already do that. It's how do we begin to do that at scale and really grow it? John, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. So to answer your question, by the way, I think yes, this continues to accelerate at a very rapid pace. Sorry, John.
Oh, and that all makes total sense, David. I think that it's really quite amazing that Disney launched their streaming media, Disney Plus, a year ago, and in 12 months, they have as large an audience as Netflix. Now, think about that. Now, sure, Disney had great content. Sure, Disney did a great job, but it's also, I think, a observation that the speed at which adoption of new things is happening at a totally accelerating rate of change. So I believe that if we were having a webinar 5 years from now, and we discussed the topic of, so what was it like before digital advertising? What was it like before we had marketing automation? People would say, well, why does anybody care? Because everything is marketing automation and everything has gone digital 5 years from now. But so one of the things we used to say in Silicon Valley was that the genius was being able to see the obvious 20 years ahead of everybody else. So Steve Jobs saw the world 20 years ahead of everybody else. But it's no longer 20 years. You know, it's not 10 years. You know, it may not even be 5 years. And the speed at which things change, and when you talk about change, it's not one thing changing. In the tech world, we used to say, well, look at the change that's caused by Moore's law. The number of transistors you can put on a similar size wafer scale will double every 18 months to 24 months. Well, the fact is, we've got all kinds of changes going on in parallel. Those changes are accelerating and they work together. That's why I love this conversation about what's happening with marketing automation, what's happening with video, you know, what's happening with streaming type services. And the reality is that all of these things are going on in parallel, and so they just compound on one another. So I would say that if an organization wasn't doing marketing automation 5 years from now, you'd have to wonder, you know, are they still a business that anybody cares about? And yet, you know, there are a lot of people today who haven't gotten into marketing automation. So it's one of those things that's going to happen, whether it's with Zeta Global or whether it's with somebody else. The reality is that there's a accelerating momentum that is going on with some of the new tools in the toolbox for chief marketing officers. And these aren't things that may happen in a few years. These are things that are already available. It's a question of, you know, are you and your team and your organization ready to take advantage of it?
Right, great. So we only have time for one more question, and I kind of want to focus on a pretty broad topic, but I'd love both of your takes on this. So happening in tandem with the changes in automation are also changes in privacy, right? You've got the spat between Apple and Facebook over the planned IDFA update, Google saying it won't track users across multiple websites as it phases out third-party cookies. Are these sorts of shifts game changers for advertisers, and how do CMOs deal with the speed with which these changes are coming?
Well, I mean, first of all, a lot of these changes are very unexpected. I mean, you know, we've been seeing this type of stuff for years, starting with sort of GDPR and then, you know, the California Consumer Protection Act, and you're sort of rolling through there. Now, the fact that sort of some of the very large, big tech players are sort of battling it out as it relates to how the others use their platform to track consumers and generate revenue is a little bit of fallout of their, I like your term, spats with one another. What I would tell you is that, you know, when you think about the landscape and you think about the ecosystem, ultimately we at Zeta believe the consumer should be giving permission to market to them. And you know, just to say, we depend very heavily on our opted-in consumer database at Zeta. We think other companies, of which there are a number, that work in an opted-in consumer ecosystem are going to be successful for many years to come. Back to your original question, what's first-party data, what's third-party data? And I think that when you think about the ecosystem, consumers are just going to want more control of their data. If you told a consumer 20 years ago, we're not going to run any TV ads to you, but you're going to lose every single piece of content that you wanted, they probably would have said, keep running the TV ads, right? It's very similar on the web. The vast majority of publishers are able to generate their content because they're able to run advertising alongside of that content. And the more close to a transaction they can get, the higher level the intent, the higher they can garner the rate for that advertising, which allows them to pay their reporters and pay the people who generate content. Otherwise, we end up in a world where, you know, it's all user-generated content, where there's sort of no, you know, New York Times or others that are there to be helpful. So I do think there's a balancing act here between permission and between customized offers that are generated to people. And listen, I might be crazy, but I think people are going to have to see ads on the internet. They're going to have to see ads in CTV. They might as well see ones that are relevant to them. So the ability to do that, though, doesn't have to encapsulate all of the things that I think certain companies are doing today to track them. And as that is peeled back a bit, I think that's healthy. The challenge I think we have societally is pendulums tend to swing very hard, right? So you've had this sort of free-for-all where, you know, quite frankly, a lot of companies have been doing things that, you know, maybe consumers wouldn't be happy with. And then you're sort of swinging to nothing, which I don't think works. You know, we believe that the truth almost always lays in the middle, and a consumer's ability to give permission and the ability to ingest their behaviors and what they're doing, not to share it with anybody, but to truly figure out what their intent is and truly figure out what they want next is valuable to the consumer. I do worry, and I don't want to get too sort of into this for a whole host of reasons, you begin to worry about 1, 2, or 3 companies controlling the entire internet. And I think if that happens, it becomes very bad for publishers and very bad for consumers. I do think an open infrastructure that's fair and allows everybody to share in it works. I will say that we don't depend on the current in-app tracking ecosystem, and we don't depend on a tracking cookie. At Zeta, we're actually doing it in a very, very different way for a whole host of reasons. We also never share our data. Our data exists only in our data cloud, and it never leaves it. We only share the intent-based score with our clients. So it's sort of a little bit of a balance act that we play, but I do think it's going to be important going forward that companies understand that first-party data is mission critical to success here and the ability to ingest different signals that are out there. John, did you want to add to that?
No, I think you summarized that really well. I mean, what I love about the way you've led Zeta Global, David, is that you've kept us opt-in. We don't use cookies, and we are able to continue to have, I think, incredible success without getting caught up in a lot of these really big public issues that involves security, privacy, how people are using data, particularly in social media. And I think everyone who's in the tech world knows that there is regulations to come. Maybe it will be something like what's happened in Europe. Maybe it'll go further than that. We'll just have to see. But I think there's a lot you can do, because you've demonstrated it at Zeta, without having to, get into those controversial issues. Fortunately, we don't have that kind of task that some others do.
Yeah, well, I do want to stipulate, we do launch first-party cookies when on our platform, and we do access very large pools of third-party cookies, but we don't use the data. So it's just sort of for modeling and other things, we don't sort of address it back. But we do have a large sort of ecosystem that we look at through both of those methodologies, neither of which would be affected by the changes that are being discussed, is sort of my point. But the reality is that permissioning is sort of at the heart of what we do. It's also at the heart of all first-party data, right? If a company has first-party data, by virtue of the fact they become your customer, they want to be your customer, and you can use that data to figure out who else wants to be your customer. And we see a lot of value there. I totally agree with John. I think, regulation is going to continue to come. I think it's going to be interesting, sort of this new concept of sort of where sort of big corporations that control browsers, phone ecosystems, and other components of the internet are starting to make changes that, quite frankly, would really hurt a number of third-party marketing companies, us, not being one of them, but would really hurt them. We're a marketing technology company. We're sort of all software and data. Companies that are more on the ad tech side could be affected by that. Some of that stuff is just, it's going to be very tough for the companies that are trying to shut that down to justify how they're doing it and why they're doing it in a world where, you know, organizations are moving to more open access. We'll see what happens. We don't have a real fight in that game, so I don't generally want to be sort of digging too deep on it for a whole host of reasons. But it's certainly interesting. It's been an interesting few weeks since that happened.
Very, very well said. Sadly, I think we're out of time. I think we could talk for hours about this. But David, I'm going to knock it back to you quickly.
Well, listen, let me just say, Tiffany, thank you very much for doing this. I'm a big fan of your work and really appreciate it. And I do want to say, you know, good luck. You are, I'm not sure I should point out you're 9 months pregnant, but we appreciate you doing that. And we wish you all the luck in the world with your baby and your family. It's just so wonderful for you guys. Thank you for squeezing this in sort of right before the moment, so to speak.
Thank you. And thank you for taking so much time to go over, you know, all of these different issues. I think data and privacy and issues about tone and how to look into 2021 are going to continue to percolate through the ad industry for a while to come. And I really appreciate you, John, and you, David, just giving us your point of view in such concise and well thought out terms. So again, thank you for walking us through what the landscape looks like.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Take care, both of you.
Take care.